Well, welcome to ASU Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law's webinar presented by our Legal Method and Writing Department on making AI work for you, the law professor. So in this session, we are going to have some fantastic content from some great presenters that I'll introduce in just a minute. But I wanted to go over a couple of logistics first. So as I mentioned, this is being recorded. Once it is uploaded and ready to go, we'll put it on our YouTube channel, which you can access through our ASU Legal Method and Writing site. If you have questions, and we hope you do because we have planned to have lots of time for questions at the end of our presentations, go ahead and click on the Q&A box. And in that Q&A box, you will be able to type your question and we will share it with the panelists once we are ready for questions. If you have any difficulties, you can email me at kimberly.holst@asu.edu. I will be trying to monitor that as well. But beyond that, I'm really excited to talk about how we can use AI to help us as law professors. I really think that one of the things that has happened in the conversation around AI is getting stuck in what do we do about AI? And this one is just trying to move past that a little bit into how might we use AI? Because I really think, and I think most of this panel will probably agree with me, that when we understand how we can use AI, we can better understand how our students can use AI, how practitioners will use AI. So really, while it's beneficial to us, what we're presenting today, we also think that will be beneficial to our students, to the future practicing bar, et cetera. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce all three panelists and the order that they're going to speak in, and then I won't do a big introduction before each of you. But we're going to start with Abby Patthoff. She is a professor of legal research and writing at Chapman University's Dale E. Fowler School of Law. Abby's going to talk about her presentation about different types of AI that might help you with your scholarly work. So whether that's working on creating scholarship, editing scholarship, and any host of things related to that, Abby has got you covered. And then we are going to move to Tracy Norton, who is the Erick Vincent Anderson professor and an assistant professor at Louisiana State University's Paul M. Hebert Law Center. Tracy, and then she'll be followed by Will Monroe, the assistant director for instructional technology at LSU's Hebert Law Center. They are both working with Susan Tanner, who unfortunately couldn't make it here. She's down in Kentucky, but she's at another conference today. They are working on a project that will hopefully pull together a bunch of fantastic AI tools for us to use going forward. It is the AI toolkit for law professors. So they're going to tell us about that work and what we might be able to find in that toolkit once it's available and how it will be beneficial to us. So again, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A, but I am going to turn the floor over to Abby.
There I am. Okay. Can we hear me and see my slides? Yes. Okay. Thank you to Kim and Sue for organizing this webinar and for bringing us together to talk about this topic. A lot, as Kim indicated, a lot of the academic conversation about generative AI has been kind of largely existential and focused on how it impacts our teaching and our students' learning and the practice of law. So today, I'm glad that we're here to explore a different AI pathway, specifically how we can use generative AI to help us. I'm going to talk about how we can use it to enhance our scholarly work and contribute to the growth of legal writing as an academic discipline. So that's what I set out to answer when putting together this presentation. So how this tool can help us, the legal writing professors. Our community tends to attract the kinds of personalities who often put on other people's oxygen masks before our own. So this session is about us. What can generative AI do for us? Think of it as a little self-care on this Friday afternoon. Okay, so if you are here today and you haven't pressed mute while you wait for my co-panelists to come on, I assume that you're interested in writing scholarship, or at least are scholarship curious. So I will go through this slide somewhat quickly. I think there's a lot of nuance to the question of whether and when we choose to engage as scholars. And the decision should take into account institutional support or lack thereof, family and childcare support or lack thereof, and personal interests and passions. But there is little doubt that if and when we do choose to engage in scholarship, engaging in scholarship can enhance our individual professional standing and benefit the legal writing discipline as a whole. Again, if you're here and if you've stayed, you probably know the barriers to writing scholarship as a legal writing professor. You've probably written and wished there was a way for it to be less painful and time consuming, or you want to be someone who writes, but barriers like a heavy teaching load, a heavy service load, or lack of institutional support, like access to research assistants, mentoring, or summer research grants, have prevented you from achieving your writing goals. So I want to explore how generative AI can help us overcome some of these barriers and contribute to our discipline's growth. I've compiled a non-exhaustive list of ways we might leverage generative AI to help us with our scholarly endeavors. Emphasis on non-exhaustive, because I'm sure that we can think of other ways. But the ways that I've selected to highlight today are accelerating service-related tasks, assisting with scholarly research, accelerating, outlining, and structuring our articles, and supporting the drafting process. Okay, accelerating service-related tasks. To keep this presentation to my allotted time limit, I almost cut this one, but because workload is such a significant barrier to scholarship for many of us, I wanted to at least touch on it quickly with a summary slide. And I'm happy to talk about the specific examples that I cut afterwards if you're interested. When I was putting together this presentation, I went back through my chats from the last academic year to see what I used it for the most. And these are my top three. Emails easily take my top slot, typically service-related emails. Sending and responding to emails is a huge time suck for me, and I suspect that I'm not an outlier in that respect. So having an AI assistant to help me with that task frees up time for me to do other things. The primary generative AI programs that I use for these purposes, all three of these purposes, are ChatGPT and Claude. There are lots of free products you can use for this purpose, and I'm not here to sell you on either ChatGPT or Claude. Those are just the ones that I like right now. The goal here on all of these service-related tasks is to streamline the process of getting a first draft, right? It's not to abdicate these tasks to a robot, right? You still have to edit to get the result that you're willing to sign your name to, but editing is a task that I personally much prefer to facing the blank screen. Okay, in the AI sessions that I have attended at conferences and webinars in the last year or so, the consensus has seemed to be that generative AI can be really good for helping with or accelerating writing tasks, but that it isn't so great for research. And I think that's true for the kind of research tasks that students and practitioners are most commonly doing. So looking for statutes and regulations and case law and treatises that explain the law on a particular issue in a particular area for the purpose of resolving a client problem. The open AI products, as we know, are prone to hallucination, and legal research specific products from the vendors, at least in their current iterations, draw from a limited number of databases, and the outputs they produce often don't cite the best or the most on-point sources. But there are some generative AI tools that are more helpful in the academic space than they are in the practice space. And I submit to you that those are good research tools that can help us achieve our scholarly goals. So the two that I want to show you are Scholarshift and Claudius Scholar, because they're Gen AI tools that were built for law-specific scholarly article research. A note about scope, I'm not talking about Lexis plus AI or Westlaw Ask Practical Law in this presentation. At this point, I wouldn't recommend either for scholarly legal research because neither one has law review articles in the databases that it searches. Okay, so what do I recommend? First, Scholarshift. Scholarshift calls itself the first analytical platform to deploy machine learning to legal scholarship. It compares the text of any document that you upload to a large database of law review articles and tells you which ones are related. You can upload a completed article, or you can upload a page of notes. For this presentation, I uploaded a very rough draft of an article. Really, it's 10 pages of random notes and half-baked ideas and a few fleshed out paragraphs. And the tool pulled back for me a list of on-point law review articles. And I know you don't know whether these results are any good or not because you're not familiar with the draft that I uploaded, but I found that they are good. Unsurprisingly, it turns out that machine learning is quite good at identifying relevant scholarship. So in the early stages of writing an article, I think this tool could help you check your idea for novelty, right? Has it been preempted? Has someone else already written about this idea? And in later stages, it could help you figure out whether you've missed something, right? Whether you've neglected to cite someone's work that you really should have cited, right? Which to scholars who are new in the discipline, right? Who are writing in a new area is so valuable because you don't want to, not mention voices who came before you. Scholarshift presents the articles in order of relevancy. The bar here, hopefully you can see my pointer as I'm circling it, is the relevancy bar. And for many of the articles, Scholarshift will send you directly to pages of the article that are most relevant to you. So you can click through to sort of the pin page. Another cool thing the program does is it gives you a gender breakdown estimate about the authors you've cited. So in the extremely rough draft that I uploaded, 75% of the authors that I cited were women, which I thought was just a cool statistic to be aware of. Although I've been happy with the results I've gotten from using Scholarshift on a couple of projects, you of course shouldn't rely solely on the tool. It does have some limitations. The major one is that its database primarily draws from digital commons and bpress repositories, as well as some law journals and law schools that have directly opted in and requested indexing. So it's not a comprehensive view of all available legal literature. But as part of your research process, I think this free tool can be a time saver. Okay, the next tool that I want to put on your radar, if it isn't already, is Claudius Scholar. This is not to be confused with Claude, which is an open AI product that is not specific to legal research. Claudius is positioning itself as a competitor for Scholastica. Like Scholastica, it provides a platform for submitting your work to law reviews. That part is for a fee. But unlike Scholastica, it provides a generative AI-powered drafting and editing platform that is free. This is what it looks like when you navigate to the AI drafting tools. I've done screen captures here instead of a video because in my experience, using it, Claudius can be slow to respond, right? So if you've played around with Lexis plus AI, for example, you know how it takes a while to think. Same thing with Claudius Scholar. So I took some screen grabs to cut out the wait time. So Claudius says to us on the welcoming page that it can help us draft or revise sections of our articles. It can help us find references to support our claims. It can help us research on-point law review articles. It can help us cite get our cites in Blue Book format. And it can help us generate abstracts and do preemption checks. Some of these functions are better than others. I have taken them for a test drive, so you don't have to. Okay, after the opening screen for AI tools, Claudius gives you these buttons to choose from. First is I'm going to go to the reference function. Sometimes when you're writing a sentence or passage and the idea that you're writing about is one that is generally accepted, you think to yourself, or the editor on your paper says, you know what, this idea should be cited, but you don't know where you got it from or what to cite. The reference function will suggest law review articles that you can cite for that proposition. So for this slide, I clicked on the reference button, and then I entered 4 sentences from an essay that I wrote. And the sentences essentially say, right, in writing feedback to students, we should tell them not just what they've done wrong, but also what they've done right. That idea is something I've picked up from being in the legal writing teaching community with all of you lovely people, but no particular article or articles come to mind immediately. So I dropped this into Claudius, and Claudius suggests 10 articles that I can possibly cite for this proposition. Now, of course, I'm not going to blindly cite any of these. I would chase them down to confirm that the 1 or 2 that I end up citing are actually good choices to support my proposition, but the tool gets me started. Okay, preemption check. So next, you can upload a complete or incomplete draft, and Claudius will run a preemption check. I uploaded a copy of an old article that I published, and its first hit was, hey, you've preempted yourself. But I haven't really personally dug very deeply into this feature, but I do think it's important that we're aware that Claudius is trying to sell itself to student law review editors. One way that it is doing that is by pushing this tool, which Scholastica does not have. So regardless of whether these results are good results, these are the ones the tool is going to spit out at students who are deciding whether or not to publish our work. So it may be wise to run the preemption check just to be aware of what it's producing. Next, the research button. So the research button is not a very well-named function because it doesn't really do research. To use this function, you have to already have an article in mind, and then you can interrogate Claudius about the article. So Claudius can summarize the article for you or give you the primary arguments and conclusions of the article. You can ask it to describe the article's methodology or whether the article remains relevant in light of new legal trends or changes. Okay, drafting. So I know I introduced Claudius on the ways AI can help us with research slide, but this tool also offers drafting assistance. It offers to rewrite, complete, or expand portions of your article. Specifically, it says, let's draft your article together. I am specifically trained to draft in the style of top law review articles. Simply paste a paragraph or section of your paper, and I will rewrite, complete, or expand your text with precision. And I have to admit, my first instinct when seeing this invitation was ruh-roh. Right? I was worried that style of top law review articles that Claudius refers to was a euphemism for impenetrable academic speak. But my own anecdotal experience has actually been pretty positive. I will say, caveat, this drafting button was here last month and earlier this week, but when I went to Claudius this morning, it has disappeared. So I have an email out to Claudius asking why the button has been removed from the AI tools and whether there are plans for it to be reinstated. In any event, assuming that it will be reinstated, here's what the function looks like. So for this slide, I gave Claudius a few sentences and some bullet points that I had written for a section of the paper. It didn't really keep my formatting, but you can kind of see my bullets in here a little bit. And I asked it to expand it for me with a target of hitting 1,000 words. And so you can set the target at whatever you want it to be. And I decided to try to head off the impenetrable jargon problem by giving it some instructions about the tone that I wanted. So I asked it in the additional instructions, I said, tone should be professional, but conversational. And I think it did a pretty good job of following my tone request. Even if the button is not reinstated, OpenAI has the same ability to expand your drafts, right? So if you give Claude or ChatGPT a word goal and some guidance about what you would like it to expand, OpenAI will do the same thing. When you are ready to submit a law review article for publication, the submission process requires that you include an abstract of the article. Having spent months in the process of expanding your article and being in a deep dive kind of mindset, it can be hard at the finish line to zoom out and summarize your article in a brief abstract. So Claudius allows you to upload your article and it will generate an abstract for you. This was its first attempt at an output for one of my old articles, which I didn't like at all because it was too stilted, impersonal, and academic. I don't like the third person framing, right, where it says, this author argues, this author calls. So what I did next is I gave it some additional instructions and I asked it to be more conversational and less academic. I told it, you are trying to grab the attention of law student journal editors. And Claudius listened. I think what it spit out is more attention grabbing, right? So it says, imagine this, you're a law student sitting in class, heart pounding, palm sweating. The professor throws a question at you and your mind goes blank. It's still not my voice and I would need to revise it so that it sounds more like me, but it gives me a jumping off point and it gives me a brainstorming idea so that I'm not working from a blank page. Okay, Claudius also offers to put nearly any academic article as well as the New York Times and Washington Post articles into Blue Book format. All you need to provide for an academic article is the title. So I tried out this function with Alexa Chu's citation stickiness article, and it gave me the site. I also tried it with an academic article from outside of legal academia, so a science article. It's not on this slide, but it did a good job with that site too. But I have also found that this is the buggiest feature that Claudius offers right now. 8 out of 10 times I would get an error message saying that the Blue Book feature was currently unavailable. And I was never, despite trying it multiple times on different days, different weeks, to get Claudius to give me a citation to the Washington Post or the New York Times, which is a shame because those citations are usually the ones I need the most help with because I don't cite those sources as commonly as I do law review articles. Okay, outlining. So language models like ChatGPT and Claude are trained on huge amounts of human-generated text, right? These models have a very good understanding of how we communicate, right? And the way we structure our communication. But since these tools use a predictive model, the content they produce is mostly predictable, right? Predictable content for scholarly purposes is not great because our goal, right, is to add something to the conversation. Predictable structure, on the other hand, is very useful because it adheres to the conventions of the genre. So it's what our colleagues and the student editors at the law reviews that we're submitting to expect to see. So it gives us a box in which to organize our messy ideas. I told Claude that I was writing an article about how generative AI can help legal writing professors advance the discipline of legal writing scholarship. And I asked it to give me an outline that follows the typical law review structure. And it gave me this starting point. It knew to begin with an introduction section, then a background section. It knew I would then need to review the relevant literature. And then it suggests that I add my contribution by going through the specific applications of generative AI to legal writing scholarship. None of this is groundbreaking material, right? But I don't think that's the purpose of using AI as your writing buddy. The purpose is to help you get momentum, to help you make progress when you feel tired or overwhelmed or stuck. There we go. As teachers, I think we fear a tool that a student could simply prompt to write a legal brief, right, on a certain topic, and then have it produce a competent, compelling product with one click, right? And we have to teach them that such a tool doesn't at least currently exist, right? Instead, if they're going to use generative AI, they have to use it responsibly, which means engaging in repeated prompting and instructions. And the same is true for us as scholars, right? Although we wish we had an easy button where we could draft an entire law review article with one prompt, we can't expect generative AI or anyone or anything for that matter to provide a meaningful response to a question without a lot of instruction and context. The clearer you are with your instructions, the better. I often think of my relationship with AI as similar to my relationship with my students, right? I have really genre-specific expectations that they won't know unless I teach them all of them, right? So I have to teach audience and tone and the goal of the communication. And the chatbot's first reply is almost certainly not going to be perfect, right? It's a collaborative and iterative process. And it's the interaction that improves the results. I think my favorite part of drafting with generative AI is that it gives me permission to write something imperfect. Often I fall into a trap that some of my students do, which is that I judge my early sentences too harshly, and it causes me to get stuck. But I don't have the same impulse to harshly judge my inputs to generative AI. And maybe it's because I'm so used to typing word fragments into Google, right? Like street tacos near me. Drafting collaboratively with generative AI helps me achieve and sustain momentum when I otherwise might have been stuck trying to find the perfect words to express what I wanted to say. Okay, this is my question slide, but we're not doing questions just yet because we're going to go to my co-panelists and then circle back to questions later.
Yes, thank you so much, Abby. That was great. I know we have a couple of questions already, so we will get to those again at the end. And now we will turn our attention to Tracy.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, hello.
Hi. So let me share my screen with you, and then let me expand it. All right. So make sure I'm doing what I'm trying to. Okay. So I want to introduce you to the Law Profs Generative AI Sandbox. This is a project that Will and Susan and I have been working on for a little over a year. And you know, one of the challenges of producing anything, whether it is an article or a lesson or whatever on AI, is that the ball is constantly moving. And so like there's no point at which you can say, okay, I know what I need to know and now here's what I have to say. You just sort of have to jump into the stream of it and say, okay, here's what we know as of now. And so that has been some of the challenge of developing the sandbox. Originally, we were calling it a toolkit, and it's only recently that we started talking about the idea of playgrounding or sandboxing, which I think is a much better metaphor for what we have and for what is possible, because you're never going to be able to have a toolkit that is static, and you're never going to have a set of skills about AI that is static. It is constantly evolving and changing. And just like Abby showed us, you know, sometimes you've got tools that you really like, and then you go log into them one day and they're all different. They're sometimes, you know, a button is gone or something doesn't work. And that's because everybody is constantly trying to keep up with things as they change. What we have put together is a website, and I'm going to walk you through what's there. I'm going to show you a little bit of the detailed content so you can see. We're going to soft launch the URL next week. And I say soft launch because I don't feel like there's ever going to be a point at which I would call this a complete product. I think we have enough of a product to be able to say this is usable. We've got a lot of stuff here, and we've certainly got more than anybody's going to be able to go through in one sitting. But we look forward to evolving the content as the technology evolves and as AI in law and legal education evolves. And we also look forward to adjusting content and adding content as we get requests. And one of the things you'll see is that there is a request box on the front page because we'd like to hear from everybody about what kinds of things would be useful. So here we go. To avoid any technology snags, I have done screenshots of the pages, and also that way you don't have to worry about how to get back to all of those pages. You'll have them in the PowerPoint slides. All right. So the idea started with an idea that Will brought up. Will and Susan and I had been talking about generative AI, and we were all very excited about it in the months after OpenAI released ChatGPT to the public. And one of the things that came up in one of our early conversations was this idea of disposition. And it was an idea that Will brought up in an early conversation. This idea of disposition toward learning and the value of approaching something with curiosity rather than closed-mindedness, or approaching it with wonder as opposed to fear. And so what we wondered in listening to a lot of law professors, both in legal writing and just on our faculties, talk about AI was, how can we help people move from a disposition of fear or anxiety to a disposition of curiosity and wonder? And so that was part of our original goal, was to provide resources that aren't so intimidating that you are afraid to try them, and that give you enough information that you understand that this isn't going to replace you. It's not going to take your job. It's not going to replace the education that we give first-year law students in analysis and writing or research. It is simply a tool that we can use, a tool that we can teach our students to use, and a tool certainly that practitioners are beginning to use in different levels. I just did a CLE this morning and asked for a show of hands on who had used some AI. And I would say about a third of the lawyers raised their hand. And then I asked who had used Lexis AI and co-counsel. It was 2 people. And so I think this isn't being used quite as ubiquitously as Lexis and Westlaw would have us believe, and as some of the legal media would have us believe. This is, I think a lot of people still have a lot of anxiety around it. And certainly law professors still have a lot of anxiety around it. So we wanted resources that encouraged people to just come to the table wherever they were. And so we came up with this idea of providing resources that, first of all, let you evaluate sort of where you were on the spectrum of understanding of AI, and then let you jump into the stream where you were most comfortable. So we hoped that we could provide resources that would help you move from one disposition to another. So no matter where you are, you'll have the resources to move further if you want, or simply to explore very deeply the place that you're in. We also wanted low risk, high exploration. We wanted to create an environment where people could do things that were helpful, that were meaningful to them, but didn't have any risk. Nobody was going to judge you on it. You didn't have to actually use it. You could just play around with it, but you could play around with it in a lot of different ways. And I would say that for me, one of my biggest challenges with generative AI is simply a failure of imagination. I just don't always think of the ways in which it could be used. And so that was another thing. We wanted to provide people with ideas. Here are some areas you can use it in. So our approach generally is that generative AI is a tool that works well when you approach it with literacy and curiosity, when you understand what it does, what it doesn't do, and when you're curious about how it might work for you. So this is the website. We focused on, because we are not web designers, we focus on functionality, not how it looks. And we think it's pretty useful. We're proud of it. So you'll see that there's a menu across the top of different ideas. And then on the first page is where you can start to figure out how you're going to enter the resources. So you've got a link under Discover Your Persona, where you can take a generative AI disposition survey that asks you, I think it's about 10 questions, and then at the end gives you a category that you would fall into. And so the categories are explorer, enthusiast, practitioner, and innovator. And so you can look at the resources under each one. And so for each level, you will find things like, initially, right now we have primarily tutorials. As we add resources, there will be other things, but there's also information on lesson plans, ethical guidelines, best practices, and then some student resources that you can use and offer to your students. So that's the entry point. You take the disposition survey, you see where you are, and if you click on those links, it will give you an introductory tutorial on using AI, generative AI, at that level. And so here's the Explorer tutorial. This one, it starts with just sign up, just get an account. You don't have to use your actual email for the account. You can make up a Gmail account for this, just an email that you can use to give it. And then the first task it suggests is responding to emails, because that's where a lot of us start. Like Abby had talked about, this really takes a lot of what I call kind of the knucklehead stuff off of your desk. I will sit and agonize over a 3-line email to the dean for 30 minutes. And generative AI can just pop that out and it sounds awesome. This is also a great leveler for those who in particular are neurodivergent. Students who have ADHD and have trouble focusing long enough to do that kind of task. Professors who have ADHD. I'm autistic. I've discovered that recently. It's a weird thing to find out about yourself at my age. But I've discovered that part of my anguish over the tone is that I am generally fairly tone deaf. I'm aware that I'm tone deaf enough that I have to do something about it, but it takes me a long time to figure out how to do that. Thank you notes. It's great for thank you notes for the same reason. I can't ever figure out how to write a thank you note other than just, that was great, thanks. So it helps with tasks like this. So this walks you through how you can use it. The first example is an email that probably most, if not all of us, have received at some point. A suspect at best reason for missing class, and then an invitation for you to reteach the material one-on-one. I have found that ChatGPT is fantastic, particularly in this situation, because I do want to fire off a quick response, and this always helps me do something a little bit better. So it gives you a prompt that you can try. So for the novice tasks particularly, we offer you prompts that you can try, and then we sort of graduate the complexity up throughout the tutorial. And we do that with the other levels also. We've also got tutorials for drafting hypotheticals to use in class, for drafting assignments. I use ChatGPT and Claude I use Claude for some things and ChatGPT for some others. With regard to assignments, but it just drafted for me my open memo assignment for the end of the semester that I just gave to my students. I had an idea for what I wanted to do. I provided the wording of the statute to Claude, and I said, draft a hypothetical for me that would challenge the students to analyze. And I gave it the 2 elements I wanted to be the difficult ones, and said that they should both be able to be argued either way. And it spit out a hypothetical for me. I worked with the hypothetical, less of this, more of this. This argument's going to be better for the prosecution. I need it to be equally challenging for both prosecution and defense. Once I got the hypothetical where I wanted it, which took probably about 20, 30 minutes, then I said, what documents would a student need for this assignment? What if it was actually a case, what documents would you need to prove these elements? And it generated a list of about 15 documents. And I said, I want documents, 1, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 14. And it generated those documents for me in under a minute. And that took me about another, I'm going to say hour or hour and a half to edit those documents. And so I handed out an assignment yesterday that had the memos, the supervisor memos on top of it, and then a record of about 10 documents, each just about 2 pages long. But they were excellent. They were absolutely excellent. And that usually takes me a number of weeks to get that done. And then I'm always worried that something's going to be inconsistent or something like that. And ChatGPT checks for that. So in some of the more sophisticated tutorials, it walks you through some of those tasks. Let me go to the next one. So now I'm going to show you sort of what's under each of these main titles. Hold on, I need to move something out of my way. There we go. So the first one, what is AI? It talks about generally what AI is and how generative AI works. I found that when lawyers and law professors have a better understanding of exactly what is going on under the hood, that they are less concerned that it's going to be the disruptor to education that they think it is. It is going to be a disruptor. It has already been a disruptor, but not in the way that a lot of people think. It does not hamper a student's analytical skills. It does not hamper our own analytical skills because it doesn't do the analysis. It doesn't have any computational or analytical abilities. It's just language prediction. So I find that when lawyers and law professors and law students understand what it does, 2 things happen. One, they get a little bit less concerned that it's a shortcut for something that they have expertise in. And 2, they get a little bit more curious and they're able to think of ways that they can use it that leverage what it does without tripping over what it doesn't do. So there's that information under that tab. Under the policies tab, we've got some explanation of things to consider for policies, as well as the policies themselves for law school wide policies, for course policies, and then for a writing acknowledgement that would be effective if you want students to acknowledge their use of AI, if you wanted authors for law reviews to acknowledge their use of AI. This is an AI acknowledgement. We have AI acknowledgement statements that allow the authors to acknowledge their use of AI and not send the message that AI is bad. We don't want anything AI. AI can be incredibly helpful. Just again, not for the intense analytical stuff. The next section is teaching ideas. And again, we call that bespoke pedagogy. The kinds of things we've got information about course design. That's both about instructional design and accessibility in design or universal design. We've got examples and exercises. We've got models and samples, and we've got writing assignments and instruction on how to draft all of those things. Course design in particular is something that it's pretty good at because there is so much information on the internet about course design. And so when you're wondering whether there's an area that you could use it for, you just want to think about, is there a lot of stuff out there already on the internet? If there is a lot of stuff out there already, then it's probably going to do a pretty good job of it. So for example, if you want to write an Instagram post, well, there are tons and tons of Instagram posts. So it can do a pretty good Instagram post. It knows what that looks like. The same with a lesson plan. It knows what a lesson plan looks like. It knows what course outcomes are. It's really good at all of those things. And those are things, incidentally, that no one ever teaches us to do. And so this can be, for sure, a great starting point, but often sometimes just a good ending point too. Next are administrative ideas. We walk you through how to use it for letters as distinguished from emails, for curricular design and assessment, apart from, smart course design, things, for example, that the ABA requires of us in terms of assessment. It can really help you with that process and what would be a valuable assessment and how would you pull that information together and what would you need to do to analyze it. That's all out there on the internet. There are tons of resources about that. They're just not aimed at law professors. They're aimed at K through 12, or they're aimed at college. And so it can take that information and it can apply it to law school pretty easily. Letters of recommendation in particular, I think most people who are using it in law schools use it for letters of recommendation because, again, you want to get the tone right. You don't want every letter to sound identical. You want them all to sound unique, and it's hard to do that. But using ChatGPT, it makes that a lot easier. And also, now when a student gives me their request for a letter of recommendation, I ask for their resume. I always ask them to write me a paragraph about why do you want this job? What is it about the job in particular, the area of law, whatever. And now I ask them for a job description if they've got one. I plug those things in. I add some information about my student, and then it pops out a really amazing letter. That, of course, I have to personalize it to make it sound like me, but that's not that hard anymore. It is able to do my voice for me because I've uploaded enough of my writing that's genre specific. So I've uploaded literally every letter of recommendation I've ever written. I've got them in a Google folder. I uploaded all of that. And so it uses my voice to write those now. Next are the mind and body. There are some amazing things you can do with generative AI for executive function, self-regulation, and wellness. Study schedules, and then there are all sorts of specific tools for executive function that are incredibly helpful. I'm able to do a lot more in recommending things for my students to make the course content and the course tasks more accessible to more students, beyond just giving them the time and a half that they need for, an exam. And so this has really taken my ability to be accessible to the next level because I don't know much about most disabilities and about what the challenges are. And this has been incredibly helpful. And so we've got some of those resources for you. And then we've got a list of external resources, some blog postings, some online articles, some other things. We are also going to add a section at some point of scholarship, legal scholarship on generative AI, so that people have a list of that in one place. It certainly obviously won't be exhaustive, but we'll add to it as the scholarship evolves. So those are the things that we have, and we look forward to putting this out into the wild next week, and we look forward to your comments, suggestions, and questions on it.
Thank you, Tracy. It looks amazing. I can't wait to play in your sandbox that you've created. And we're going to hear more from Will.
Hello, I'm going to share my slides here and get started. Okay, very good. Well, all right. This is really enjoyable for me. I'm taking notes as both Abby and Tracy are talking. There's some new things that I learned about today. And I guess where I want to start is Abby started out mentioning the heavy teaching load as one of the burdens that, might, if relieved a little bit, might make more room for other things you want to do. And I guess that's probably where what I'm going to talk about could come into play. So I'm going to talk about hopefully a very practical thing, how to build a GPT. And I want to reassure you, and maybe this is only one or two of you out there, but if you can upload a file, then you can do this. So because I did it. And so I'm going to start out with a little warm up. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to work through a few steps on how you might go about doing this, how you create a GPT or a chatbot, determining the purpose, choosing a platform, uploading documents or knowledge as they sometimes get called, drafting some instructions, and then I guess we'll all have a few questions. So the first thing I want to do is just drop a little poll in, and I hope this works for you. Are you interested in creating GPTs or chatbots? And if so, why? Um, I promise to share my own motivation here in a moment, but yes, okay. Um, sounds daunting. I'm talking to you, my friend. I want to feel less daunted. Yes, yes, yes. And I was probably a very much a maybe kind of person too. Like, well, sounds like a lot of work. What benefit would I really have? Maybe too many things to consider. Why should I want to? Well, I'm going to give you my reason why I wanted to and I'll kind of chart the path in how I got to that point too. Oh yeah, brainstorm a law school committee problem. Yeah, okay. These are great answers. There is kind of a cool and fun factor with this too, I think. I think study materials for students, although that's not what I'm going to be talking about, I think there's a lot of possibility out there, and there's some folks that are doing some good work describing this right now, writing some law review papers. Actually, there's a source in my sort of references in my slides that would cover this. These are great. Well, thank you for these answers, and I'll get on with why I chose to do this. So determine the purpose. So here's a little history here. So at Arizona State University, the sort of the first inspiration I think I got was something from your instructional design and new media lab. This great tool called a learning objective creator. It's awesome. You give it material, you can upload some paragraphs of text, and you can, select different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, different educational levels, and it will give you back well-formed learning objectives. And I thought this was so cool when I first discovered this. I'd already been kind of playing with ChatGPT and Claude to do the same thing, but I loved the kind of dials and affordances that were made available through this tool, and that got me going. They also have a rubric generator there, which is excellent, along with some accessibility tools. Then I started looking around for some information about, or for a tool that might help me with overall course structure and learning activities. And I found something called Smarty, which is a tool developed by Suraj Sabagan. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. And it's a very interesting chatbot whose ethos is really to design more inclusive learning activities and learning outcomes and rubrics, and to help with overall structure. And I really liked it. As qualitatively, it kind of ran away with the information that I gave it, maybe a little more than I had anticipated. I guess I've come to see that the back and forth that I had with Claude or with ChatGPT was really involved a lot of iteration, whereas this particular tool kind of had I won't call it agency, but it really provided a lot more output. But still, it had a lot of promise. And I really liked the ability to work with inclusivity and to work with learning activities. But it got me thinking, I wonder if I could shape, if I could shape this so that it would reflect a little more of what I'm after here. And that led me to a colleague of mine who works at the LSU Online Campus Unit. They're basically our instructional designers, the folks that support a lot of our online learning operations here. They had developed an internal tool for their learning experience designers, for their instructional designers. And it was a GPT, it was built inside of ChatGPT, and it had a sort of knowledge base that was made up of their own internal documentation and templates and best practices and other materials. And I thought that's really exciting. And they had some instructions for it. And I talked to my colleague who worked there. She was very generous in explaining how she got there. And I thought, can you do this? I want to try. And so then I thought, all right, well, what am I really trying to do? Well, I wanted help with a course that I was planning to teach in the spring of 2025 coming up. And I wanted help drafting course and module learning outcomes. I wanted help, designing assignments and creating rubrics. I wanted help aligning the outcomes, assignments, and rubrics so that they all reflected those initial learning outcomes. I wanted help planning the lessons. And I wanted it to reflect some of my particular challenges with a legal tech course in a law school. And so, how was I going to go about doing that? Well, that was what I determined to do. And my first step then was to choose a platform, which I'll go ahead and maybe make this simple here. I already knew I was going to use ChatGPT because I had a subscription to it that was provided by my law school, thankfully. And but there are other alternatives out there. So OpenAI allows you to create GPTs that will let you upload documents, so knowledge, and I'll explain a little bit later about what I added there. But of course, the disadvantage is that there's a monthly subscription. Poe, which many of you may be familiar with, is free, has a variety of models. It lets you upload documents, but it does have a message limit in the free version. And then something I just discovered this week called Hugging Chat is free and has a variety of open source models. It doesn't allow for document uploads. The information that I'm sharing with you here, much of it comes from a great Google group called AI and Ed. It's mainly folks in higher ed, but there's a subgroup devoted to custom GPTs and chatbots. If you're interested in this topic, that link at the bottom here or in my resources will take you to their website. And they meet often. Their meetings are well run. They have interesting presenters that have a number of different aims and objectives. Some of them are sort of instructor facing, like what I was trying to do, and some of them are for students. So, yep, that was how I came to choose my platform of OpenAI. So the next was to upload the documents, the hardest part, perhaps. So what did I want to include in my knowledge base? How did I want to shape the dialogue? I mean, Tracy talked a few minutes ago about how well prepared many of the LLMs are to work on course outcomes and activities and rubrics because they simply have so much information about it. But I wanted to take it a specific direction. So first, I wanted to take advantage of my colleagues' instructional design templates and best practices documents. I was familiar with them and what they were doing, so I really wanted to have that shape my my work with the chatbot. Multimedia learning theory, which I won't go into, that was something I had familiarity with. I thought it would be useful. I wanted to make sure I was addressing usability and accessibility concerns in these different activities, instructional technology, relevant ABA standards. Because I was working with the legal tech course, I wanted to think about ethics and where there were opportunities there in my learning activities and some emerging legal tech instructional frameworks that are out there. All of this is what I wanted to be sort of thinking about and talking about in my course design process. My next step was to draft instructions. And most of you already know that you can start simple and you should iterate. You want to treat this like a conversation. There's no single prompt that's going to be useful all on its own. Engaging with the language model, asking it questions, asking for help. One of my colleagues here continues to remind me that if you don't know how to do something or whether it can do something, you just ask it for help. And that screenshot right here is just, I think, probably the first prompt that I used to get myself started when I was thinking about designing a GPT. And I don't think the components here, which came from the educational custom chatbots run that I was just mentioning, the Google group, I don't think these will be a surprise to you, but it might be helpful for you to think this way when you're designing your GPT. So for mine, the persona I wanted was going to be an instructional design assistant, someone who's familiar with legal tech courses, well-versed in legal education standards and best practices of instructional design. My goals, I wanted to support drafting measurable learning outcomes, assessments. I wanted to make sure I was aligning these different components with relevant ABA standards and emerging technology frameworks. The kind of behavior I wanted the GPT to be proactive in guiding me through the course design process, offering step-by-step guidance. I wanted it to prompt me for additional details if those were needed or if something was incomplete or unclear. I wanted it to be friendly, and highly professional. I wanted it to be concise, but to be able to elaborate when I asked it. These were all the things that I gave my instructions, and to develop those instructions, I actually just worked with ChatGPT back and forth until I got something that I liked, and it worked out well. And that extremely fast delivery is how you too can build a custom GPT and chatbot. And I thank you for your attention there. I'll just mention here at the end, there's some resources and you can find the slides there. But thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Will. Well, we do have some questions, and for the question part, I'm going to turn it over to my co-moderator, Sue Chesler, who's also here with me at Arizona State.
Great, thank you. Will, could you maybe stop sharing your screen?
Oh, sure, yeah.
All of the panelists, I think that'll be helpful. Great, thank you so much. And if you have more questions, please feel free to continue to post them in the Q&A. I'm going to synthesize now a couple of the questions because a couple of the questions relate to privacy. And let me give a couple of examples. So there was a few people who raised some concerns with respect to drafting students a letter of recommendations for students that I know a couple of you have mentioned that you use that in order, right, to free up some of your time. But the issue of putting in student-specific information and not really knowing what happens with that information, whether it becomes available then to other individuals, whether you ask the students in advance, whether you can, for example, post some of that information. And so that's one area where the privacy came up. I also myself was thinking when Abby was talking about posting some of her drafts in Scholarshift and Claudius Scholar, I love the idea of having it like draft your abstract and things like that. But then I thought about, well, does that now mean my draft is out in the world for people to see when I'm not ready for people to see that draft? So if some of you can address some of those privacy concerns, that would be fantastic. Tracy. No, you're muted.
So it's not a search engine. You're not submitting information to the web that can be searched. And so one of the questions I got this morning, I was talking about how the dark web was sort of part of the training corpus that LLMs use. And so somebody came up to me afterwards and said, we're having problems in a police department. She was a retired prosecutor. They're having trouble accessing the dark web. Could they use this to access the dark web? And I said, no, absolutely not. You can't search for the information. That's not how it works. It generates statistically probable output. Now, if 100,000 people post your abstract on the internet, that content might find its way into somebody's answer. But if you get a response from ChatGPT and then you use that as part of your abstract, or let's say you just use it wholesale for your abstract, nobody's going to be able to find that. Even if they type in Susan Chesler, Arizona State University, abstract in your topic, they're not going to get that information. That's not how it works. It's not a retrieval engine. It's not a research tool in that way. What it does is generate statistically probable output. And so unless you're putting in enough client information, student information, personal information to make it statistically likely that that information is going to come to the top of the most likely response on the internet, you don't have to worry about it. Now, you can also set the settings in, I think most search engines, most GPTs, if not all of them, so that your data is not used for training, which means your data, or fine tuning rather. So your data isn't absorbed into the corpus that it uses. Your data stays separate from that. And the question then becomes, well, what if it's breached? Well, yeah, I agree. But what if your docket software is breached? What if your time recording software is breached? What if Moodle is breached? What if I get that, but there would have to be a breach for that to happen. And so, and again, even if there were some kind of breach, unless you've got a team of people in a warehouse in, I don't know, Sedona somewhere, typing your information in 24/7 for about a week, it's not coming out. It's just not coming out.
And I want to add on a little bit. So with respect to Scholarshift and Claudius Scholar in particular, both of those say in their terms of service, which I actually find to be more accessible than ChatGPT and Claude's terms of service. They're more, they're right there on the kind of opening page. They say as soon as your session is done, everything gets deleted. So at least with respect to those two, I wouldn't be worried. I will say when I use OpenAI to draft letters of recommendation, I don't use student names, even though I agree with Tracy. I agree, like, it's not a search engine. There's probably not really a risk. I just pulled up a prompt that I used. I wrote, you are a law professor. Write a letter of recommendation for a judicial clerkship for, and then I wrote student name, like just in brackets, I wrote student name, who earned an A in both semesters of your first year legal writing course. Student name is also a member of the law review, and you hired student name to be your teaching assistant. And then I just clicked go. Because I don't know, something makes me a little squeamish about giving it my students' names, but like, I think the information that I gave about it, like, okay, they got 2 A's and they're on law review and they're a teaching assistant. Like that's generic enough that I'm not really worried.
I guess maybe more of the concern is in uploading. The concern raised in the questions was not necessarily the student's name that you put in, but if you uploaded their transcript and their CV and all of that information, does it then become part of what's available for others to see? And I think Tracy very adamantly says no, right? It's not going to happen.
It doesn't. But also, like, even for their resumes, like I open their resume, I cut and paste all the stuff so it doesn't have, like, I feel the same way Abby does. Like, I know that there is no danger at all that information is going to come up, but there's something that makes me a little squeamish about putting a student name in there. And so I don't put the student, like, I just cut and paste the relevant parts. I don't even put the whole resume in there. I just put what I think is the relevant part in there. So yeah, you can keep the name out.
So related question to this, that I think it didn't come up specifically here, but is maybe on the same page of questions, which is, so if you're uploading assignment materials and all of this to create things, similarly, people wouldn't be concerned that then suddenly your assignment materials would somehow be found, so students would have an easier, would be able to cheat or do any of that. I think that's in the same vein of questions.
Okay, this question also came up a couple of times in different ways from folks about using any, I guess, AI for email writing. And a couple of people raised the concern that drafting the prompt with enough information so that you get what you want seems like you might as well just write the email itself, and that it doesn't actually save folks any time. And that came up from a few people. So I'm curious, because I personally have used ChatGPT quite a bit, but I haven't used it to draft emails. And so for those of you that have, do you agree, disagree? How does it save you time?
I can speak to that. And I really like what Tracy said. It made me maybe more aware of something about me, which is that, like, I know I'm a little neurospicy. And so I do also struggle with tone. And so as others were talking, I was scrolling back through my history to see what kinds of emails I usually send. And most of them are things where I'm worried about tone. And I think I probably would have spent way more time than I needed in drafting that email to get the tone right. Right. So for example, I wrote, here's one of mine. You are a law professor. A new student has emailed you and referred to you as Mrs. Patthoff. Write a short diplomatic email gently explaining why the appropriate title for a law school professor is professor. Right. Like, I would have probably spent way too long worrying about hurting this brand new student's feelings and like getting the tone exactly right. And like this got me there a lot faster. I also wrote, you've received the following email from your dean. Write a condolence email to colleague. Like colleague had lost someone, and like I wanted to say something nice, but like I also didn't want to spend a ton of time figuring out what to say. I wrote, write a short congratulations email to colleague, say something diplomatic about how you hope this job is less fraught with student problems than the last one. and then I attached the email. So like a lot of it is just me trying to figure out like what's the right tone here.
Yeah. So it's almost as if you write you do write the email to some extent in the prompt, and it's you're using AI to kind of smooth out your language or make sure you get the right tone that you were looking for.
Exactly.
Is that true? Tracy and Will talking about emails is similar.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'll do that I've started doing in the last like 6 months or so is like I'll just cut and paste the email and then say, I'd like you to draft a response. Please ask me whatever questions, please ask me for whatever information you need to know to draft a response. And it'll ask me about the tone, about what my objective is. And so I'm just typing in little phrases, and it doesn't take longer than writing the email for sure. And it generally takes a lot less because I don't even have to construct a sentence. And so, like, you know, like Will was saying, I think we forget that, like, it's not human, it doesn't have human qualities, but you can talk to it like a human, and the best way to use it is conversationally. And so I tell it all the time, ask me for whatever missing information you need.
That's a really great tip. I'm gonna write that down because I had not thought of that. I'm always thinking about making sure I'm telling it everything it needs to know, but why should I be guessing what a chatbot needs to know? I can just ask it, and that's a really great tip. I have a question for Tracy. In using OpenAI to create hypos for either writing assignments or exams or whatever kind of assessment, how do you know that it's a workable problem if you're using an AI source that doesn't have access to cases, right? And so, like you explained to us how you walk through drafting a open memo problem, which I would love someone else to write my open memo problem. But if it doesn't access the cases, how do you know the analysis is going to work?
Well, I still have to check that. But I choose, like, after you practice law for a little bit, you've been teaching for a little bit, you know what elements are probably going to be problematic. And so I'll have it choose those, and then I'll spot check the research. And then I'll see, one of the things I do is I'll check, first of all, sometimes I'll start with an ALR where I can see that there's a lot of sort of chatter among the circuits, and then I'll base the prompt on that. I'll say, use this statute, these elements, write the hypothetical.
Thank you. I see a question just came in, and also I think probably many people will be curious about this, about using AI for grading, where the professor would upload the question, maybe a model answer and a grading rubric, and then have the chatbot grade the exams or papers. That's the question that came in, and I'm curious to see what you all think about that. But also, even short of that, I'm wondering, have any of you used any AI to create a model answer to share with students? I always find that to be something I ask my TAs to do. And obviously it takes them a lot longer than probably it could take AI. But I'm not sure which AI has the ability to do that, again, because at this point, I don't think Lexis or Westlaw's AIs can do that. But thoughts on grading and model answers from anyone?
Just a quick note here before I let my colleagues answer that, because I don't have the answer. If you want to, there's a source in my slides by someone named Sean Harrington, who's written a couple of papers recently about chatbots and grading. And maybe you're already familiar with this, but it's very interesting to watch him work through kind of these ideas, grading and what that's going to look like. So I recommend it. They're not terribly long, and I think they kind of bring to light some of the issues.
Thank you. Sean you used to work here at ASU in our law library, but he left. So thank you. Yep. Tracy.
He left for literally greener pastures. Yeah. He's in Oklahoma where things are green. So I am obsessed with this. And every time I get a set of papers, I do a little bit more work on it. And so I'm in the middle right now. I've just finished a set of papers, so I've evaluated them all. I've already met with the students in the conferences. So, and we're on to the next assignment. So I'm taking those papers that we've already cycled through and I'm working through them to see if I can get some meaningful feedback. So far, it doesn't do a good job if I give it something of just popping out good feedback that I could use for a student. What it's really good at, and what I'm really bad at, is it's very good at softening the blow of the comments. It is good at sort of the terminal comments at the end, the sort of conclusory summary comments. And so I do still have to draft something, but it redoes it, and it redoes it in a way that it's worth the time to me to draft the comment initially and then have it redrafted, because the redraft is so much better. And what I'll say is, I'll give a basic summary and I'll say, these are the things that the paper did well. These are the things that were challenging, and here were the challenges. Or sometimes I'll give it the rubric and I'll say, the only issues were on these items. Everything else was good. And I'll detail the issues with those items. And it will write these really nice comments that reaffirm all the things the document did well, and then transition to, things like, as you develop your skills further, here is the next area of emphasis for you. And so, I'm really fortunate to have incredibly motivated students who you can compliment, and they won't think that means they have nothing else to learn. Like they're looking for the negative so they can do something with it. So you can compliment them and it won't go to their head. I love it for that. It writes some very, very good comments. Again, there's tons of stuff on the internet about good feedback. And so it uses all that. And so I use it for that. But I have not given up the ghost on having it write a sample in Creac that's good. So far, it does not. And it writes a bad student paper. That's what it does so far, which makes me happy.
Which has some value.
If they're using ChatGPT, they're only going to get a bad student paper. And it just takes a lot of direction, but I'm working on it.
So related
I
to
love that we're kind of coming back to this theme of what ChatGPT and things of its type do well is rewriting what our gut reaction is, right? And so I always say to myself, I just don't have enough time. And I tell my students, I don't have enough time to tell you everything that works well. So just assume if I don't criticize it, it probably works well. But that's a great idea, Tracy, of saying, here's my critique, and now can you write something nice about the rest of it? And so maybe just then tweaking it, not being overboard, right? Not saying anything's perfect, but at least addressing some of the more positives. I really like that idea.
There's another thing I'm working on, and I need to write something about this, but it's a concept from K through 12 education called an empathy map. And it's just 1 or 2 sheets of paper where you map out sort of information about the student at a glance, and then conference notes or individual notes. And so it's taken me 7 years, and fortunately ChatGPT has made this possible, where I've finally this year been able to print out the empathy maps before the conference. So I have, a lot of us do surveys at the beginning of the semester. So I give them a survey. I've written a script that ChatGPT told me how to write. I dump it into these empathy maps. And so for every student, I have their undergraduate major, their undergraduate degree, when they graduated, graduate information. And then a lot of information I ask them about, like multiple choice questions. I ask them about writing. Which of these concepts are you most comfortable with? Which are you least comfortable? How much writing did you do in your major? I've got all that on one sheet with boxes for my conference notes. So what I'm working on with a company in Lafayette, Louisiana, is a bot. And when I say working on with a company, they make money. That's what they do. I'm not doing this for money. I'll give it to everybody once it's done, but I need their help. And I'm enough of a promoter for them that they're willing to help me. where I can dump all of that information into ChatGPT. I can dump my conference comments. And so I've started keeping a Google folder for each student, which contains their empathy map. It contains the conference notes. It contains all of their writing. So I can do things like ask it for trends. What are you seeing? What are the recurring issues? One of the things I had it do was design my teams this year. Usually I have somebody in the registrar's office do it for me based on LSAT and GPA. This year I did it entirely on the surveys. And I said, I want teams of 4 or 5. And here's what I want. I want a diversity of this, this, and this. And it gave me great teams based on their majors, based on where they lived, based on, it did a fantastic, much better than LSAT and GPA. And so I'm starting to collect data on students that I can have it analyze so that I can be more helpful to the student.
That's great. Kim, I think I interrupted you at some point.
That's all right. It was just related to a question that came in and what was being said. And I thought, the idea of talking back to the GPT and, what are the limits of that? Somebody was asking about, is that prompt question answer method feasible for writing a brief or writing a memo or that type of thing? Or is it still so analytical at this point in the process that it's not good at guessing the best responses there?
I would say yes, it's still good at that. So I had lunch today with an AI, a computer guy who was helping me with something. And, the conclusion that he and I had both come to independently, but he articulated it far better than I could, is that ChatGPT will get you 95% of the way on a lot of things. That'll get you 95% of the way. The remaining 5 takes a degree and expertise on a lot of these topics. And so can it write a brief? Yes. Is some of it going to be crap? Yes. Do you need a law degree to know which part of it is crap? Yes. And so it'll get you 95% of the way on any task, but you got to be able to get it the other 5. It's never going to get you 100%. And like Abby was saying, sometimes voice is really important. And so you do want to go back and at least teach it what your voice is so it can write in your voice. But yeah, it's never going to get us 100% of the way based on what it does. This technology is based on the technology that Google developed for Translate in the early aughts. And it's the same technology. OpenAI just realized what it could do like a couple of years ago. And they didn't think anybody would use it for anything. Like, this has been a shock to them. And so the technology is not new technology. It's old technology. We're just using it in different ways. And so this idea that this represents this gigantic leap forward in technology, it doesn't. It's just a new way to use old technology. And so it's not the thing people are scared of, which also means it's not going to save us from, a ton of hard work, but it's going to save us from some knucklehead work.
We have a little time. Yeah. So here's an interesting question. Do you worry that reliance on AI to comment on student papers or write your emails or letters of recommendation, etc., mean that we have sort of now just lost our own individual voice or style, and we're just sort of letting the AI speak for us?
I mean, I can jump in there because I find that most of what I end up editing from its response is adding me in, right? So I'm like, okay, I like this idea that it gave me. That's a really nice diplomatic way to say that one thing. Now I'm going to rearrange around that and add my voice.
Other thoughts? There is one specific question. Tracy, what AI model were you using to create such groups? And you talked about creating teams, I think you call them.
Oh, I just used ChatGPT. At the time I was using 4.0 because that 1.0 or whatever it is hasn't, I don't know why they don't know how to name things. But the newest version wasn't out yet. And by the way, they keep saying with each version, oh, with more analytical power. It doesn't have more analytical power. It doesn't have any analytical power. It is a language generator. The language generating has gotten better because they're giving it more instructions on the back end. It's not more analytical. It's just got more instructions on the back end. So, but yeah, I used ChatGPT. I could have used, I mean, I would have used Claude or ChatGPT. That was not a hard task. That was not a hard task at all. It's just something that would have taken, I'd have never had the time to do that in a million years. And so, yeah.
Here's what I think will probably be our last question. Apparently law reviews are now going to start asking professors whoever submits, I shouldn't say just professors, about their generative AI use. What do you think about that? How would you handle those questions? Any of you?
I can jump in on that. So actually, I think Tracy sent around like an informal survey on the LWI listserv maybe just last month. And so my sense is that maybe there aren't many law reviews that have adopted an official policy yet. A lot of them are maybe thinking about it. And to the extent they are thinking about it, it looks like the policies that are brewing look a lot like the policies that courts have adopted, right? So the courts that have adopted Gen AI policies say things like, okay, if you're going to use generative AI, you need to certify that you have used generative AI, but you have independently verified that everything in it is correct, right? And so like, that's my impression of what the law review policies are going to look like. So I don't know. I mean, like philosophically, I don't think that generative AI is an author, and I don't think that we need to be citing it in the way that we cite authors. And so when I mean citing, I mean like writing a sentence, having a footnote, and then putting a citation. I don't think generative AI is an author. It also doesn't serve a source verification function because we can't go anywhere and find the information. So I don't think it's useful. I mean, to the extent that we're citing it at all, maybe we'll cite it in the author footnote where we thank everyone who helped us, right? Like maybe generative AI will be in there along with your research assistant and your brilliant colleagues who gave you feedback. But beyond that, like I really don't think it needs citation.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. Kim, before we leave, there was at least one question on making sure we let everyone know where to find the recordings, and obviously then they can also access the slides.
Yes, absolutely. So we will post the recording on our YouTube channel, which you can always find from our ASU legal method and writing page. So if you go to law.asu.edu and find legal method and writing, it is available there. You can see our other workshops. We have done other AI workshops where you've seen some of the folks on this very webinar present before, and maybe that Sean Harrington that was mentioned as well makes an appearance. So please check those out, and it'll be available. It usually takes us about a week to get the video downloaded and then re-uploaded to the YouTube channel. So that's where it'll be. I did want to pass along one of the questions that came into our panelists in case you didn't see it. Was a huge thank you, giving that professor hope that maybe she will be able to do some of these things despite administrative tasks that are piling up. So I want to echo those thanks. Thank you so much for sharing this, for putting together all of these resources for us. And I look forward to continuing these conversations in the future. As you've all stated, they continue to develop and change, and I think we learn more and more every time we get together. So thank you very much. Bye.